Welcome back for part 2 of this story. Got a new candle today, cinnamon orange. Smells yummy, kind of Christmassy for April, but we're gonna go for it. Yesterday I tried to record this episode and I got really lost. I wanted it to fit into this hero's journey format that I've laid out, but my story doesn't fit very neatly into all the little boxes I wanted to fit it in. Surprise, surprise. Seems to be a theme with me that I want to fit in the boxes and often can't find a way to do so. I thought I would just ramble today a little bit. I seem to get across what I want to get across best when I just speak. So that's what I'm doing. Okay, recap. Grew up super good girl, fit quite nicely in all the boxes, actually, I would say, or tried my damnedest to. And in my early 20s, got married, pregnant with a baby, all of a sudden make this discovery that what I was raised to believe, I could no longer make fit in my life. In the hero's journey, you start in the ordinary world. For me, that was Mormonism and being a good girl. Then you receive the call to adventure. For me, that was discovering that, I don't think that what I was taught lines up with me anymore. I don't think this is true anymore. And then oftentimes there's a refusal of the call before you cross the threshold into the special world or some kind of underworld. And I definitely tried to refuse this call. If you talk to most people who left the LDS church, it's a gradual process. They don't just one day read something and then they're like, I'm done, and stop going. That does happen for some people, but I wouldn't say it happens to most because the sacrifice is too great to just leave. This is our livelihood, our salvation, even our community, our identity. There's a lot riding on not leaving the church. For most people, and definitely for me, it's more of a process to leave than just a switch that gets flipped. It was gradual, and then when I finally was like, I don't think I can believe this anymore, even then, I tried to refuse the call into the unknown, away from my belief system. I remember reaching out to BYU Idaho professors of mine that I thought maybe could find a way to make this cognitive dissonance work and help me stay. I prayed. I played Emma the year that I was losing my faith. I played Emma in a Joseph Smith musical. Joseph Smith was the founder of our church, and Emma was his wife that he took before he became a polygamist and took other wives. Polygamy was one of the big things that I was struggling with in the history of the church, and I thought, maybe this is a divine chance for me to rebuild my testimony. I'll get to play the part of Emma, and this will give me a testimony of polygamy. I would say it did exactly the opposite of that. Not to mention, I was pregnant when I played the role in early stages of my pregnancy and so sick at every rehearsal. I was struggling with nausea and morning sickness. And then on top of it, I was trying to rebuild my testimony through playing this part of Emma in a really historically based play about Joseph Smith, hoping that it would reignite my testimony as I was frantically trying to claw onto anything so I didn't have to fall into the abyss of disbelief. Musical did not help at all. It might have even accelerated the process of me leaving. By the time my baby came, I'd stopped wearing my garments, which, for those that don't know, are like the sacred underclothes members of the church wear after getting endowed in the temple. They're supposed to be a spiritual symbol of protection. I was outgrowing my garments and I just didn't replace them. Couldn't bring myself to. And then by the time Jaylee was born, it was really easy for me to just stop going because I thought, people will just think I'm not taking her to church because she's a newborn and it's December and I don't want her to get sick. But then I just never went back. If I could have found a way to make it work for me and make it work for my brain and feel good about it, I would have stayed in the church. This was grief. This was a loss for me. It really didn't even feel like a choice because I think I would have chosen to stay. I had built my whole identity on this. But I stopped going to church, and then I spent about the next 5 years in denial. I had accepted the call, or rather been pushed into it, but in some ways I was almost dissociated about where I was. I felt like I was free falling into the abyss, nothing to hold on to. I didn't know what to believe in. I wanted to believe in God, but I had just felt super betrayed and lied to by my church, and how could I believe in God when all this other stuff that I thought I had a testimony of, it felt like it just disappeared from me overnight. And so I had to throw everything out other than some of my values, right? I still very much considered myself like a truth seeker, a good person. I think that was the hardest part for me, was I had so tied in my identity as good person with the church, and I could not figure out how to keep my identity as a good person outside of the church because that was the measuring stick. I knew I was good when I was in the church because I was paying my tithing. I was going to church every week. I was reading my scriptures every day. I was writing in my journal. I was doing all of these things. When I left that, I left my ability to consider myself good because there was no checklist anymore. There was no measure of this is what a good person does. And so I think I spent the next long time, years, maybe the whole last decade, trying to find a new standard for myself of being good. I had to use other parts of my identity and figure out what that would mean. So I wanted to be a good mom. Oh, it's so painful to remember this, but I got like really obsessed with Waldorf motherhood, which I still love. It's adorable. Waldorf is about creating a magical childhood for your kids, essentially. Lots of open-ended play, wooden toys, stories about fairies and eating like homegrown, home-cooked. I don't even know. I didn't do a lot of this stuff, but I felt really horrible that I wasn't doing it. I became obsessed with Pinterest boards, YouTube videos, podcasts, and reading books about Waldorf and simplicity parenting. I became really obsessed with, okay, if the church is no longer my standard, I want to be a good mom. And I just bombarded myself with what that standard looked like. And it was freaking impossible to meet. I made myself miserable over it. This was me trying to find a foothold, right? Honestly, this was me trying to refuse the call. So many of those years were just creative ways to avoid the unknown. I wasn't ready to let go of the identity I'd worked so hard to earn. The way I handled this identity crisis was I wanted to prove somehow that I was still good and successful. I wanted to hold on to something that gave me an identity as a good person. What else did I try to do? I tried to start an Amazon business with yoga mats, which fit with this Waldorf lifestyle that I wanted to live. I poured myself into that, convinced I was going to make $1 million in a year. In the middle of this, there was a challenge in my Facebook group around my Amazon business to make $100 in a weekend. And I was camping that weekend, but I'm competitive and I wanted to win the challenge. I had started exploring watercolor paintings and I just posted like a self-portrait I had done on Facebook with a cheeky caption. I'll paint you a bad portrait for $15. Pay me by midnight and you get whatever I make in 1 hour. No edits, no promises. I called them bad portraits and they were a smashing success. I had so much fun doing them. If you go to my Instagram page at That Kimber Girl and scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll see these bad portraits that I did. Over the year of doing these, I made about $3,000, which was more money than anything I had done with all these other businesses I had tried to start. It was fun, it was easy, and it really opened something up in me where I realized like, hey, maybe the secret isn't that I have to prove myself that I'm good, because I was not a professional artist. The charm of my art is that I don't know what I'm doing and I just create for fun. When I started painting these bad portraits, that is when I really accepted the call into this unknown world. And here's the interesting thing. So in the hero's journey, you've got the ordinary world to start, then you get the call to adventure. Then there's the refusal of the call, which I stayed in that period for as long as I possibly could. And then there's this part of meeting the mentor. So in Lord of the Rings, for example, Gandalf would be the mentor, or in Star Wars, it would be Obi-Wan Kenobi. And I was thinking about this for me and I was like, did I do that in my hero's journey? Did I meet the mentor? And then it clicked for me is what my podcast was for me. Around the same time that it was starting to click that, oh, maybe I don't have to prove that I'm a good person through these paintings. I also started my podcast, Just Be Your Bad Self. I was starting to let go of this idea that I had to prove myself as good. And the podcast became my mentor. I was my own mentor through showing up and sharing my story and sharing my voice. And it gave me access to people I felt called to interview, to explore this idea of what makes us lovable, what makes us worthy. I talked to trans and non-binary people exploring the occult like tarot and Reiki and other spiritual modalities that I had never really considered before. Talked about motherhood and how hard that was. I explored boudoir photography. If you go back and listen to my podcast, you will get to hear this part of my journey in really entering the underworld. That's what my podcast was. And my podcast for me was the guide, which is cool. I think that's cool that in some ways I got to be my own guide. I almost decided to post old episodes today so that you can hear the juxtaposition between where I started and where I got. It is stunning to hear the difference from the beginning of my podcast to the end of my podcast. If you want to hear a fun juxtaposition of my journey and how far I came through my podcast, listen to episode 5, where I get really vulnerable about my journey and my inability to trust myself or believe in my own authority. And then a year after I started the podcast, I did an episode called That Kimber Girl. And you get to see this transformation through my podcast of this people-pleasing, shy, in the void woman who was just showing up and being vulnerable to this episode a year later where you can hear it in my voice. I feel confident. I feel excited. I was at the top of my game. I had hosted retreats to help other people step into this place of love. And I thought if I were familiar at that time with the hero's journey, I think I would have thought that I was through the hard stuff. I thought I had reached the end of my journey. I had succeeded. I did it. I'm confident in my bad self now. And I have a bad reputation in my hometown a little bit. And I don't care because I'm just being myself. It felt like the end of a saga, of a story. And it was really empowering. At this point, I thought, I figured it out now. I'm successful. I've figured out the thing. And I signed up with a coach to help me expand and monetize this podcast that I built and start offering coaching and make my retreats more consistent. And I paid this coach, I'm embarrassed to even say it out loud, but I paid her $10,000 to help me set up a website and help me figure out how to really make this into a business. It was almost like starting this hero's journey all over again, or maybe it was just going deeper into this world, into the next level, because I felt like in that process with this coach, once again, I was asked to externalize my authority and trust someone else. I had named my podcast, Just Be Your Bad Self. I've had my messaging pretty locked in, and I felt like this coach came in and was like, no, you can't do this. This is how this should look. This is how this should look. She had a spiritual co-coach who would do oracle readings. She would rank like, oh, this is what's going to work for you in your business, and these are what you should name things, and these are the words you should use to be successful. And it really messed with me. I think it brought up again some of this religious trauma, which was largely for me, the religious trauma came from having to externalize my authority, having to give a prophet or a bishop or my parents or somebody in a position of authority, having to trust them over trusting myself. So when I signed up with this business coach, it brought all of that back up. I remember pushing back a little bit and being like, I know my audience pretty well. My title's been really successful. I was already being successful and I just wanted to expand, and I felt like they came in and wanted to change it all. On top of it, were telling me that they received spiritual confirmation that this is what I should do. And that really didn't set right with me. I think going through that process just burnt me out and made me question everything. And I haven't done this podcast consistently since then. Here I had gone on this whole journey and I felt like I was stepping into my own authority, my own authenticity. And nope, there were more layers I had to go through. I was learning that healing isn't a straight line. You circle back, you deepen, you spiral, and that's not a failure. It's part of the work. So also part of this spiral was that I had a retreat that overall went well, but it didn't feel in flow and alignment. And it also was part of this burnout because it didn't click as well as some of the other things I was doing. And I applied for a local choir teaching job thinking that I would be a shoo-in, and I didn't get it. And I was told to the grapevine that the reason that I didn't get it was because of the work I've been doing with my podcasts and my retreats and just the reputation that I had, which was of a rebel and of someone who supported like LGBTQ. And because I was rebelling against this idea that we need to externalize our own authority, I didn't get this job. And so there was just a few things that after I had felt like I stepped into this place of power and authority over my own life, it was like I was paying a price for it, and it made me question everything all over again. And I once again went down into depression. Another thing that culminated into this second spiraling down into the deep was something that had happened even before I started my podcast. My daughter got in a four-wheeling accident when she was only 4. It split her chin open and left her with a pretty big scar that she still has 5 years later. It was highly traumatic, I think, for my whole family. And I don't think we dealt with the trauma of that. And I think that was the other thing that came up to be dealt with at this time. It put me face to face with my beliefs. What if she would have died? How would I have coped with that? I just really sank down deep into an existential crisis. I was convinced that if I were to really study it out and be honest and beat my beliefs over the head with a baseball bat, I was convinced that the only end possible to that road was complete meaninglessness, nihilism, atheism, no afterlife, no inherent meaning to death. And I loved my daughters so much that the thought of any of that, it was ripping me apart. And honestly, I think it made me even push my family away because I couldn't handle the pain of loving them, knowing that it didn't matter. We were all going to die and I couldn't control anything. I had to face all of these deep fears. And what that looked like for me was depression and therapy, but it just kept getting worse. I remember there was a day, trigger warning here for the next few minutes, I'm going to talk a little bit about my suicidality. I remember there was a day, I had casual thoughts of, oh gosh, this life is just so hard. I don't want to be here. But there came a day when I was actually forming a plan in my brain and felt like I could have carried through. And I got on and I talked to some online hotline, which for me wasn't really helpful. I called my husband to come home and be with me because I was scared I would attempt something. After that, I knew something had to change. I had to do something to get me through this or I wasn't going to survive. After a lot of research and contemplation, I decided to try psychedelic plant medicine. I have an episode where I talk more about why I made that decision, but here I guess I just want to mention that I was doing this medicinally with intention to survive. My depression was no longer sustainable. I'd also been diagnosed with ADHD. I just felt like my life was falling apart and I couldn't function. And I'm going to end there today because I want to, over the next few episodes, really dive deep into what I experienced and what I've learned since this point. Going back to the hero's journey, I was at this point in the inmost cave. If you look at the chart, you go deeper and deeper. And I was at the bottom. I couldn't go on and something had to change. And that is when I discovered plant medicine. And I'm excited to tell you about my journeys with that and how it opened doors for me to start my return journey. But I'm not going to do it this episode. So if you want to join me for that, you'll have to come back for the next episode. And this is where things start getting really fun and really exciting. Wherever you are in your own journey, I hope you know you're not behind. You're not broken. You're becoming. You're lovable. You're enough. I'm so glad you're here. I'm excited to keep telling you this story tomorrow. And I'm going to blow out the candle now. See ya.